साइज ऑफ द अर्बन सेंटर्स। तो इसमें इसका ऑब्जेक्टिव क्या है? आफ्टर रीडिंग दिस यूनिट यू विल डिस्कवर द रियल मीनिंग ऑफ एन अर्बन सेटलमेंट एंड डिस्टिंग्विश it from rural centers. Learn the main factors which led to urbanization during the 6th century BC. Know what kind of cities existed at that time, and be able to list various features of city life in the 6th century BC. Introduction. The period starting with the 6th century BC saw the emergence of cities in ancient India for the second time. This urbanization was more significant in the sense that it endured for a longer time and it saw the beginning of a literary tradition. This tradition, embodied in Buddhism, Jainism, and many important strands of Hinduism, looks back on this period as its formative epoch. The contemporary literature is full of references to cities like Rajgriha, Sravasti, Kasi, etc. The Buddha and Mahavira were preaching to the urban audiences most of the time. After the end of the Indus cities, settled agricultural villages and wandering people inhabited the plains of India. Small village settlements with humble dwellings dotted the landscape of the country. All this was undisturbed by the din and bustle of the marketplaces and the domination of kings and merchants. You must have heard the story of King Harishchandra, famous for his truthfulness and keeping his vows. Here is the earliest version of his story from a text called the Atreya Brahmana. This text can roughly be dated to the 8th to 7th century BC. Thus goes the story. King Harishchandra did not have a son. He went up to God Varuna and prayed, "Let a son be born to me. With him let me sacrifice to thee." To him a son was born, Rohita by name. Varuna demanded his sacrifice. The king made various kinds of excuses and kept postponing the sacrifice. However, when Rohit grew up, Harishchandra told him, "Oh my dear, this one, that is Varuna, gave thee to me. Come, let me sacrifice to him with thee." "No," he said, and taking his bow, went to the wild, and for a year he wandered in the wild. Varuna was angry, and as such, Harishchandra was inflicted with dropsy. Rohita heard of this and decided to go back from the wild to his village. 6 times he started for the village, and 6 times he was persuaded by Indra to go back to the wild. In the 7th year, he bought a Brahman boy called Sunashep from his father for 100 coins. As such, he came back to the village of Harishchandra, where Sunashep was to be sacrificed to Varuna. When Sunashep was about to be sacrificed, he chanted some incantation which pleased Varuna, and he was saved. The king's dropsy also disappeared. What is significant for a historian of urbanism is that King Harishchandra was not living in a city, not even in a small town, but in a village adjacent to the wilds. All this changed in the 6th century BC. You have already read in Unit 14 that the kings of the monarchical Mahajanpads and the Kshatriya chief of the Ganasanghas used to live in cities like Kausambi, Champa, Sravasti, Rajgriha, and Vaisali. It is not only big cities which emerged at this time. Along with agriculture-based villages, there existed market centers, small towns, big towns, and other types of settlements. What is an urban center? Many scholars have tried to define an urban center. On the face of it, it seems fairly easy to define an urban center. But when we get down to details, the problem becomes complicated. For example, some writers believe that the urban center is characterized by a large population. However, it has been pointed out that some modern Indian villages have populations larger than those of some Australian towns. Similarly, some scholars argue that urban centers are larger in size than villages. However, it is difficult to determine a standard size for the towns. We know that some of the villages today are larger in size than, say, a Harappan town like Kalibangan. Thus, the number of people or the size of the settlement cannot be reliable criteria for defining an urban or rural center. Hence, it is important to identify the kinds of activities people are performing. In a village, most of the people are engaged in food production. So, the social landscape of the villages is dominated by fields and farmers. In the towns, on the other hand, the dominant people are either rulers or merchants or priests. It is possible that many people in the town might engage in agricultural activities, but it is essentially the non-agricultural activities that define a town. Let us take the example of Banaras, which is among the oldest surviving cities of India. Its fame rests not on the very good quality rice produced there, but on its being a very important pilgrimage center. Banaras attracts pilgrimage from all over India. These pilgrims offer various kinds of gifts to the deities in the temples. In this way, the keepers of the temples are able to draw upon the resources of the people coming from all over the country. Thus, the other characteristics of an urban center is that it functions in a relationship to a large hinterland. The residents of the city might provide administrative, economic, and religious services to a population residing in an area much larger than the physical space of the city. This relationship with the population of the hinterland is advantageous to the urban center. This means that the residents of the city are able to harness the resources of the people living in the hinterland. This might be done in the form of taxation in kind of or tribute. The merchant living in the city is also able to appropriate a share of the resources of rural areas by controlling the supply of metals, minerals, or some luxury items. This means that the class of kings, priests, and merchants living in the cities have more wealth than a common man. These classes use their wealth for acquiring more wealth, prestige, and power. Now, the rich and powerful in every society have their own way of showing off. The rich in some societies build large palaces, others build beautiful temples, still others perform grand sacrifices. Some others are content with the possession of precious metals and stones. Apart from the kings, priests, and merchants and farmers, various groups of craft specialists also stay in the city who produce luxury items for the city and other objects needed by the people outside the city. These craft specialists need not the same privilege as the rich. For example, the administrator or merchant might be very rich, but blacksmiths or masons or carpenters might be quite poor. Thus, the city is characterized by the presence of rich and poor people. We can say that an urban center refers to a place where the most powerful and visible sections of population are engaged in activities other than food production. Such diverse socio-economic activities create a problem of proper coordination among those engaged in them. For example, the blacksmith would need food from the cultivator, or the merchant will need protection from robbers while transporting his goods to and from distant areas. In a situation where each of the group cannot survive without the other, there is a need for a centralized agency coordinating their activities. The need to keep in check hostilities between the rich and the poor, and the need for mobilizing agricultural produce for urban consumption also create the possibilities for the emergence of a centralized power. The emergence of centralized decision-making groups coincides with the emergence of groups exercising monopoly over the use of force. This kind of social structure also implies the coming into being of a state society. Thus, the urban society is characterized by the presence of craft specialists, rich and poor people, and a state administration. The background to the 6th century BC. In the previous unit, we discussed the emergence of Mahajanpad and centralized polities in ancient India. We have seen how, over a period of time, the Brahmins emerged as a caste category who specialized in ritual activity. Then came the class of Kshatriya warriors and landowners who gradually started levying taxes over cultivators and merchants. The later Vedic chieftains seem to have burnt up or distributed their wealth during sacrifice. The competition among the chiefs to perform more and more sacrifices on a larger and larger scale meant that they had to look for more and more booty, taxes, and tribute. In this settled agricultural society, agricultural produce and cattle were the most important forms of wealth. Especially agricultural produce was one form of wealth which could be augmented from year to year by either extending the cultivable land or adopting more intensive agricultural practices. The ruler's desire for more and more wealth probably led to the cultivation of more land and settling down of many more pastoralists and forages. The archaeological records indicate that many agricultural settlements came into existence between 8th to 6th century BC. Two factors which proved to be of great help in increasing agricultural production were the increasing use of iron tools and the practice of wet rice cultivation in the middle Gangetic Valley. Use of iron and wet rice cultivation. By about 1000 BC, Indians had learned the art of smelting iron. Over the next 3 or 4 centuries, iron came into increasing use. That is why a large number of iron tools and implements have been found from Ujjain, Sravasti, and Hastinapur. Iron weapons in particular have been found in large numbers. These would have increased the power of the warrior classes vis-a-vis the peasants. With more powerful weapons, the warrior classes could extract more wealth from the peasants. Iron weapons also increased their desire for war, conquest, and booty. Iron had a direct impact on the economy too. Iron axes could be used to clear forest, and iron plug shades could facilitate agricultural operations. This was especially useful in the middle Gangetic Valley, the areas between Allahabad and Bhagalpur, where wet rice, known the fact that the yields per acre in the wet rice cultivation are substantially higher than those of the wheat or millet in traditional agriculture. As such, there was much larger output of food grains in the rice producing middle Gangetic Valley than the wheat producing upper Gangetic Valley. It has been observed that the varieties of rice and paddy fields are repeatedly mentioned in the early Buddhist texts. This indicates a decisive shift to wet rice cultivation. Large food production made it possible to sustain increased population, which is reflected in an increase in the number of settlements in the archaeological records of this period. All this created the possibility of the emergence of social groups not engaged in food production. The Vedic sacrifices meant that most of the surplus accumulated by the chiefs was gifted away at the time of performing sacrifices. In the areas of the middle Gangetic Valley, the Vedic rituals and sacrifices did not have the kind of hold as in the upper Gangetic Valley. This meant that the surpluses which were collected by the chiefs were not spent away during sacrifices. The groups that grew up controlling this surplus wealth became the ruling class of the newly emergent kingdoms. And on the foundation of this wealth were born the cities of 6th century BC. Cities of the 6th century BC. Our information about the cities of the 6th century BC comes from many sources. This is because it was the period which saw the beginning of the written tradition in the ancient Indian history. Brahminical, Buddhist, and Jain texts refer to the conditions of this period. The excavation reports of many urban and rural centers of this period also enrich our understanding. So these are centers Kamboj. ठीक है, 600 BC के सेंटर्स हैं. कंबोज हो गया, पुष्प, कलावती, तक्षशिला, इंद्रप्रस्थ, दिल्ली, मेरठ, हस्तिनापुर एक्सेट्रा. अब नेक्स्ट आ गया दुर्ग. नेक्स्ट आ गया टाइप्स ऑफ सिटीज़ एंड टाउन्स इन लिटरेचर. द टर्म्स दैट आर फ्रिक्वेंटली यूज्ड टू डिनोट सिटीज़ in ancient Indian literature are Pura, Durg, Nigam, Nagar, etc. Let us see how the ancient Indians defined them. Pura. The term Pura is mentioned even in the early Vedic literature, where it referred to fortified settlements or temporary places of refuge or cattle pens. Later on, it is often used for the residence of the king and his retinue or for the families of the ruling group in the Gana Sanghas. Gradually, the connotation of fortification became less important and it came to mean a city. Durga. Durga is the other term used for denoting the fortified capital of a king. Fortifications protected the urban centers and separated them from the surrounding rural areas. Also, fortifications made it easier for the ruling classes to control the activities of the population residing in the city. Nigam. Nigam is frequently used in the Pali literature to denote a town. It probably meant a merchant town where the sale and purchase of goods used to take place. In fact, some scholars believe that some of the Nigams evolved out of villages specializing in pottery, carpentry, or salt making. Thus, the Nigams were market towns is also proved by the fact that certain coins of a later period carrying the legend Nigam have been found. These coins indicate that they were minted by the Nigam. Sometimes literary texts would refer to a particular section of a city as Nigam, where craft specialists would live and work. Nagar. Nagar is the most commonly used word for a town or city in literature. This word is used for the first time in the Taittiriya Aranyaka. This text has been roughly dated to the 7th to 6th century BC. Another word, Mahanagar, also refer to cities. These centers combined the political functions of the Pura and the commercial functions of the Nigam. Kings, merchants, and preachers resided in these cities. The Buddhist literature refers to 6 Mahanagaras. All of them were located in the middle Gangetic Valley. They were Champa, Rajgriha, Kashi, Sravasti, Saket, and Kausambi. Other terms like Patan, Sthani, etc. are also used to refer to towns and cities. It appears that the terms Pura and Durga are amongst the earliest terms used in the Indian literature for denoting a town. Other terms came in use in subsequent phase. What is significant for us is that both these terms refer to fortified settlements. This might indicate that kings and their followers lived in fortified settlements. They extracted taxes from the surrounding population. Their ability to store wealth and collect luxury items might have stimulated trade. Thus, these fortified settlements led to the development of a network of relationships. This led to the emergence of urban centers. This idea is supported by the fact that the Brahminical tradition ascribes the foundation of almost all the cities to certain kings. For example, a king called Kusamba is said to have founded Kausambi. Similarly, Hastin founded Hastinapur and Sravasta founded Sravasti. In Buddhist literature, cities are associated with sages, plants, and animals. For example, Kapilvastu is said to have been named after the sage Kapila, and Kausambi was named after the Kausamba trees growing in that region. However, the tradition of cities being founded by cities is quite strong. The Pandavas are said to have founded Indraprastha in the Ramayana. Also, princes of the ruling family are supposed to have founded various cities. Some of the political centers also became great commercial centers in the subsequent period. Soon, centers which were important for both the political and commercial reasons overshadowed those which were only political centers. For example, capital cities like Hastinapur never experienced the kind of prosperity that we associate with Kasi or Kausambi. Once long distance trade prospered, political leaders tried to enrich their treasuries by taxing traders. At least in two cases, political capitals were relocated in areas connected with important trade routes. The capital of Kosal was shifted from Ayodhya to Sravasti, and the capital of Magda was shifted from Rajgriha to Patliputra. This indicates the importance of emerging trading networks with an important section of the ancient Uttarpath stretching along the Himalayan foothills and finally connecting Takshila with Rajgriha. Similarly, Patliputra was located at a point where it could exploit the trade route passing through the river Ganges. It was the patronage of kings and merchants that led to the development of cities in ancient India. The literature of this period is full of descriptions of caravans of merchants going to distant areas to conduct trade. Rich merchants, along with princes, are described as the main supporters of the Buddha. The image of city in ancient India. The following reconstruction is based on the references in the Buddhist and Brahminical literature of slightly later period. Books like the Divyavadan and Apastambar Dharma Sutra provide us with an idea of the city in those times. Ancient Indian literature gives an idealized view of cities. Ayodhya described in Ramayana or Vaishali described in the Buddhist texts would be almost identical if one goes by their description. Ideally, the city's craftsmen, the cities were surrounded by defensive walls and moats, wide streets, high mansions with colorful banners, busy markets, flowering gardens, ponds filled with lotus and geese are part of this description. Well-dressed men, beautiful women, dancing and singing complete the picture of the day. This timeless description of an idealized city gives us an unsatisfactory idea of what ancient Indian cities actually looked like. Other incidental references may help us get a better view of the cities. A walk through the city. Towns seem to have grown around the intersection of two highways or along river banks. When you entered the city streets, what would you see? Well, the contemporary literary sources give a vivid description in this regard. The haze of dust raised by horses' hoofs and caravans of merchants, which the pious Brahmins disliked so much. The crowds of people clambering around shops selling various kinds of eatables such as fruits like mangoes, jackfruits, bananas or sugar candy, cooked rice, etc. The din and bustle created by women selling trinkets and bangles of conch shell and by flower sellers filled the air. If one had taste for liquor, shops selling various kinds of them would be found. The houses were generally made of earth or timber with tilled roofing. The kind of houses still visible in the countryside of the Gangetic plains. In some cases, the houses might be made of stone or burnt brick. One could see women looking down from their balconies. Sometimes one might come across a prostitute. If you were fond of gambling, there were arrangements for that too. On the roads, you could also come across the processions of the king and his retinue seated on their elephants and chariots. In some parts of the city, you could see the king's army men practicing archery, training elephants, and improving their skills of warfare. The other kind of procession you were likely to encounter was that of the wandering mendicants clad in brown or white robes, sometimes not wearing anything at all. These wandering ascetics, belonging to the various sects that emerged in this period, could be seen lecturing on various religious problems in the groves and gardens given to them. The audiences could be varied. Sometimes it was the exclusive assembly of the rich merchants or powerful princes. At other times, it could be groups of people who came from the poorest section of the society. The rich lavished their wealth upon these monks. Gardens and monasteries meant for the exclusive use of monks were also a part of the urban landscape. Items of exchange. Markets involved the buying and selling of commodities. People could be seen buying utensils and tools made of metals like iron, copper, tin, and silver. Groups of merchants specializing in the procurement and selling of salt could be seen in the streets earmarked for them. The cotton cloth of Kasi attracted quite a large number of buyers. Woolen blankets brought from the distant northwestern province of Gandhar could attract only the rich. Horses brought from Sindh and Kamboj would also be on sale. Here the buyers were only the super rich of those days. Bangles of conch shell, beautiful ornaments of gold, and combs and ornaments made of ivory and various kinds of precious stones were also in high demand among the aristocracy. Literary sources also point out that each item was sold in a separate street. Those who manufactured or brought them also sold them. There were no shops selling a variety of items. There were various kinds of traders, the shopkeepers, that is, apanika, retailers, kraya vikraya, the money investors, sethi gahapati. At least the richer people were always using coins. The coin of highest value was the silver satman. This was followed by the karsapan. The copper masas and kakani were coins of smaller denomination. Amidst this glitter of the cities was hidden a whole category of poor people who went unnoticed. In a Buddhist story, it is said that the daughter of a merchant, on seeing a chandal, that is of the outcast categories, washed her eyes for fear of pollution. With the emergence of cities, a class of washermen, scavengers, beggars, and sweepers also came into existence. The services of sweepers and the people involved in cremating corpses were essential for cities. However, these people were the most impoverished and deprived sections of society. These outcasts had to stay on the fringes of the city with no hopes of economic or social improvement in their condition. The group of beggars also emerged as a result of the breakdown of kin-based society and increasing demands on the produce by the rulers. There is a story which says that the king's men looted the village in daytime and the robbers at night. The city in archaeology. The literary sources available to us have undergone several alterations and additions in the subsequent periods. The written manuscripts of these texts, which are available to us, are less than 1,000 years old. Thus, it is difficult to sift out the material of the later phases of the history from the early phases of history. As such, the information derived from the excavation reports gives us a more dependable idea regarding the cities of the period. This is because the archaeological data can be dated with greater certainty. Also, the literary sources exaggerate the opulence and splendor of the cities. The excavated materials do not have such a bias. Let us see what kind of information is provided by excavation reports. By about 700 BC, in places like Ayodhya, Kausambi, and Saravasti, small settlements came into existence. The people living in these settlements used various kinds of potteries. Among them, a particular kind of pottery called the painted clay ware is important because many people living in the upper Gangetic Valley were also using this pottery. People in other settlements of the middle Gangetic Valley were also using a pottery called the black and red ware. By about the 6th century BC, people of this entire zone started using, along with other varieties of pottery, a particular kind of pottery having glossy surface. This pottery is called the northern black polished ware. This deluxe pottery is one of the indicators of the broad cultural uniformity in the Gangetic Valley towns of the 6th century BC. Probably, this pottery was made in a few places and exported over large areas by merchants. Another item which starts appearing at the archaeological sites at this phase is coins. Coins came into use in this period for the first time in the ancient India. The coins are made of silver and copper and are commonly those which are called punch-marked coins. They bear various kinds of symbols on one side and were probably initially issued by merchants. The introduction of coinage promoted organized commerce. In addition, copper cast irons, which like punch-marked coins did not have any writings on them, appear in this phase at some sites. The barter system required two persons willing to exchange their produce. Suppose a person has a cow which he wants to exchange for hay. There is a person who has hay but he wants to exchange it for rice. In that case, barter cannot take place. Coins, on the other hand, carry standard values for buying and selling. Besides, it is easier to carry coins than to carry cows or for buying something. The introduction of money also led to emergence of the class of money lenders. The larger settlements in this period show the use of baked bricks for housing. Soak pits made from superimposed jars or rings of terracotta used for the disposal of dirty water have also been reported. They indicate some kind of planning. In the preceding phase, people lived in mud brick hutments. There is also evidence for a larger number of settlements of larger size. This would indicate a high density of population. In some sites, drains and refuse bins have been reported. However, the excavated material indicate that many details regarding cities given in literature are either highly exaggerated or that they belong to a later period. None of the cities of the 6th century BC showed evidence of a planned layout, whereas literary works always talk about planned layouts of cities. Large-scale excavations in the ancient sites of Taxila show that this town might have come into existence by the 8th to 7th century BC. However, planned township came into existence only around the 2nd century BC. Similarly, literature repeatedly mentions that cities like Ayodhya and Vaishali covered anywhere between 30 to 50 square kilometers. The excavations indicate that none of these cities would exceed 4 to 5 square kilometers. Likewise, the descriptions of the large palaces and wide streets seem to be exaggerated. So far, except in Kausambi, no palatal structures have been reported in the 6th century BC. The houses were more like humble hutments. No monumental buildings are in evidence. Many early cities like Ujjain, Kausambi, Rajgriha, etc. show evidences of fortification. Fortifications are indicative of increased apprehension of warfare. Also, fortifications are a way in which the urban community is demarcated from the rest of the population. This population could be easily controlled by the king. This also supports the literary evidence that Pura, meaning fortified settlement, were the earliest forms of the urban settlements in ancient India. It is not believed that prosperous cities with large palaces came into existence during the Mauryan period. The literature available to us seems to have used Mauryan cities as the standard description for the cities of the preceding period too. Now let us sum up. In this unit, you learnt about the emergence of urban centers in the 6th century BC. Emergence of the city was a result of two crucial processes. One was in relationship with nature, that is by the use of iron and mastering the technique of paddy transplantation. The people of the Gangeti Valley achieved greater mastery over the process of agricultural production. The other process was the changes in the internal structure of 6th century BC society. This meant that the ruling castes like the Kshatriyas and the Brahmins, along with the class of the Gahapatis, could extract surplus food and other social products. The place where the rich and the powerful lived was called the city. Of course, the presence of these people meant the presence of a large number of poor people. That is why some scholars have said that the emergence of Buddhism was a response to urban misery. The ancient Indian literature describes cities of various kinds like Pura, Patan, and Nagara. However, literature seems to exaggerate the sizes and opulence of the cities. This was found out by the archaeologists who excavated the ancient sites of these cities. ठीक है, हिंटलैंड पता है क्या होता है? लिटरेट ट्रेडिशन होता है, रेफर्स टू ट्रेडिशंस इन विच राइटिंग वाज नोन. स्टेट सोसाइटी होती है, सोसाइटी कैरेक्टराइज्ड बाय द प्रेजेंस ऑफ रूलर्स एंड रूल्ड रिच एंड पुअर. सरप्लस पता है, टैक्सेशन ट्रिब्यूट हो गया, और वेट राइस कल्टिवेशन.